Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to Digital Arts at Google, the artist lecture series for the second exhibition. Tonight we have a great speaker lineup for you. Eduardo Kac, Marina Zurkow, Sandra Cordero, and our very own Andrew Senior. So the Digital Arts at Google exhibition series was started by Josh Middleman when he was thinking about Google's mission, which is to organize the world's information and make it accessible. And being here in New York City, and especially in Chelsea, in the Arts District, he thought, well, you know, art is a great way to access or understand information, and so Google should be involved in art. And so he found Nina Colosi and invited her to curate a series of art shows here to further that and to also foster collaboration between artists and engineers. And this is the third lecture series, and there'll be another one. The next show opens. Let's see what Nina. Remind me what. Next Thursday is the opening for the next show here in Chelsea Market. So, but tonight we have first. Can you come up? Speaking first will be Eduardo Kac, a pioneer of telecommunications art, starting in the pre-web 80s, and then emerged in the early 90s with his radical works combining telerobotics and living organisms. His visionary integration of robotics, biology, and networking explores the fluidity of subject positions in the post-digital world. His work deals with the mythopoetics of online experience, cultural impact of biotechnology, conditions of memory in the digital age, distributive collective agency, and the creation of life itself. At the dawn of the 21st century, Kac opened a new direction for contemporary art with his transgenic art. First, a groundbreaking Genesis in 1999, which included the artist's gene that he invented, and then with his fluorescent rabbit called Alba. Mr. Kac.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So in reality, and this is an interesting coincidence, those are exactly the works I'm going to be presenting. The work that deals with memory, the Genesis, and Jeff P. Bunny. So we have 20 minutes, and I will then begin in 1997 with this artwork called Time Capsule. And it's an important work in my trajectory because, for me, it represents a turning point. It's a moment in which I begin to expand my digital work in the realm of biology. The term bioart I coined back in '97 specifically to signify, to connote this passage. And the time capsule has as reference these 7 sepia tone photographs that my grandmother brought from Poland before '39 when she escaped the war. And it is in front of these 7 sepia tone photographs that represent members of her family who did not survive the war that I implanted a microchip live on television and on the web in front of them to confront the idea of analog memory with digital memory, because a microchip records information. And in the context of the live broadcast, one of the segments included a reading of the microchip content inside my body, both through the live program and the webcast.
Vamos voltar à Casa das Rosas, onde o artista Eduardo Kac está implantando chip no tornozelo. Como é que está andando a coisa aí, Celso Catelli? Boa noite.
Bom, o processo começa aqui na Casa das Rosas. Luciana Bonafé, eu estou ao lado. O Eduardo está fazendo a incisão e eu estou ao lado do médico Paulo Gouveia, que vai explicar o que está sendo feito. Dr. Paulo?
So the doctor who is assisting is asked to describe what's going on, and he says, almost like narrating a soccer match, well, now the artist is implanting a microchip, and he is slowly moving the needle, and it's under his skin. He's narrating, because of course he was afraid that he would lose his license if he actually did the work himself. So he taught me how to do this. Not that I have the habit of using syringes. And you see, if you look behind him, you see the 7 sepia tone photographs on the wall. So this idea of confronting the changing role of memory as everything becomes digital. Analog memories are externalized, digital memories become internalized, with the exception, of course, that we also internalize analog memories. And in this particular case, the digital memory is retrieved. So I had the scanner connected to a robotic finger and through the web.
Vamos voltar à Casa das Rosas, Celticatelli, já foi possível captar alguma imagem através do chip que foi implantado aí no corpo do artista Eduardo Kac, não?
Sim, Luciana. Já é
This is the third segment.
Eduardo, já é possível captar as informações do chip no computador? Então, o trabalho do artista plástico Eduardo Kac, aqui na Casa das Rosas. Vou pedir para o Sérgio Pelman.
So I myself did not know what the number was. The content of the microchip is a sequence of 9 digits, which you see on the screen there. And I had bought a 6-pack, not of beer, but of microchips, and just picked one out of the box at the last minute. So I myself did not know what the number was.
Luciana, alguma pergunta?
Celso, apenas agradecendo, desejando boa sorte, e eu pessoalmente prefiro viver a moda antiga. Mas é uma boa experiência, sem dúvida nenhuma, uma experiência inédita. Obrigada, Celso, boa noite para você, e amanhã a gente volta com o Jornal 10.
So this, in 97, creating this work in which tissue and microchips come together, because tissue forms around the microchip to secure it in position. The microchip has biocompatible glass. This question of digital, the digital and the biological started to take center stage for me. And in 98, I wrote a text called Transgenic Art, more clearly signaling the fact that I wanted to focus on the creation of new life forms in the context of art. And produced then in 1999 my first transgenic work called Genesis. So what is going on in this work? It's easier to understand once we look at this diagram. The starting point for me was the appropriation of a passage from the Bible, from the book of Genesis. I don't own a Bible, so I went online, found a King James Version, copied and pasted into Microsoft Word. And if you take King James and combine that with Bill Gates, that might be enough for a conceptual artwork. But I'm not a conceptual artist, so I persevered and translated that to Morse code. Straightforward Morse code, as you know, dots and dashes. So what you see here under this arrow is a direct Morse code translation of that passage from the Bible, which is a significant passage in the sense that this is where God gives man total control over all life, and has been down the drain from there, as you know. So inside the box, you see a code that I created specifically for this work. On the left side, you have what linguists call the motivated section of the code. Because C, which represents cytosine in DNA, is round, and so is the dot, so I established that analogy. And because T is straight, and so is the dash, I established that analogy. On the right, you have the arbitrary part of the code. So space between the letters became guanine, and space between the words became adenine. So how does this work? You have a direct translation. If you look at the bottom, you have CT, CC, G. So CT, CC is dot, dash, dot, dot, space. And it goes on like that. So CT, CC, dot, dash, dot, dot, is the letter L that you have up here from the original English text. The result is that the sequence of 360 genetic bases encodes the passage from the Bible. So when I'm doing this, I'm still working on the computer screen, and I have a text file. So I copied from my text file, pasted that into the email program, and sent that to a company specialized in DNA synthesis. 2 weeks later, I get a FedEx package with the DNA. And you look at the DNA, and it's disembodied DNA, and it becomes evident to you that all this narrative that DNA has a central and dominant position in controlling life, when you see DNA outside of the body, it is very clear that without the body and without the environment in which the body is located, DNA cannot do anything. So what I created then was the Genesis bacteria, which you see in this video. So now, if we look at this again, it will make more sense. You come into the gallery, you see the Genesis DNA sequence on one wall, a very large projection live from the Petri dish, which is in the center, which you see now, the biblical passage, which you see on the other wall. Behind you, there's Morse, and here, the web interface that allows you to turn on a UV light source in the gallery, from home or from the gallery itself. And this is shortwave UV, which means that due to the high concentrated energy, it causes real biological mutation in the DNA. In other words, if this work is in Tokyo from New York, you can change the word of God in the body of the bacteria in Tokyo with just one click. So after the work was finished, it premiered at Ars Electronica in 1999. I took the bacteria back to the lab and read the mutation and developed a series of works with the mutant text in English, because I used the code to read it back to English. Now, if you think about what this means, you are encoding digital information into a living organism, you are changing that, and then you are retrieving it. That's exactly what we do with computers. Input, processing, and output, except that you're doing that with a living organism in real time. So to me, that represents certain significant aspects of life in the 21st century, in which, not only philosophically, but materially, there is fundamentally really no separation between digital and biological. Processes can occur in similar manner in both environments, in both media, if we can say so. But of course, when you talk about the living, when you talk about, in the context of art, creating an entirely new life form, you have to recognize that you're not dealing with an object, because the life form that you create is alive like you and I. So it shares the same properties of any living organism, and empathy and responsibility become paramount in this context. And a good example of that case is the second transgenic artwork that I created called GFP Bunny. GFP Bunny is a piece in which I use GFP, green fluorescent protein, the DNA that codes for this protein that produces green light, and created a green glowing bunny. There was an agreement between myself and the lab that I commissioned to make this work for me, and the director of the lab, at the very last minute, it was the year 2000, you remember the doomsday, apocalypse, Y2K, everything, satellites will fall, computers will stop, it's the end of the world. Maybe that played a role in his decision to censor the work. But the fact is that that censorship became very controversial. We have a 4-minute clip that shows a bit of the controversy around this work.
This is the BBC World Service.
Have you heard of Alba the bunny? Alba lives at an agricultural institute near Paris, and she looks like any other plain old white rabbit. Well, that's until you put her under a blue light, at which point dear little Alba begins to glow green. And it's not in the name of science, before you ask, but in the name of art.
We touched on the genetic engineering controversy earlier in the broadcast. When we saw this story in yesterday's edition of the Boston Globe, we thought, surely not. On the contrary, surely. Here's ABC's Bill Blakemore.
Directors of the lab in France that created the rabbit are not letting anyone in to see it. But you can see a picture of the rabbit, Alba, on the website of the artist in Chicago, Eduardo Kac, who commissioned the lab to create her.
When you start to genetically engineer animals as part of an artwork, I think that you're really beginning to cross a line that isn't necessary to cross.
But animal rights groups say that Alba's artistic visibility may publicize her plight as a lab animal.
If this has been highlighted in this experiment, then it is helpful for laboratory animals everywhere.
Email us at this address, outlook@bbc.co.uk. Time now to talk about a rabbit that's got a few people into a bit of a stew. That's because this rabbit is at the centre of a project that sparked off a debate involving art and science. Spell out, if you will, the artistic message of this project.
Well, there are several messages, but one of them is the fact that Alba, like any other transgenic animal, has a cognitive and emotional life that must be acknowledged in a social space.
The rabbit genome has existed for how many billions of years, and why do you think you're so important that you can mess with it? I think you're a pawn of these biotechnology companies, and I'm sure you probably didn't have to pay very much for this to happen, because I'm sure they'd love to tout it as another one of their successes.
When ancestral man picked up a stone and called it a tool, we radically changed this planet ever since that time. Okay, and when we accepted the line from Genesis that we hold dominion over all the animals and the fish of the sea, as a society, this is generally what we do, all societies. And we must question each and every technological advance. And we haven't done a good job of it, and I'm glad that you are doing this project to bring these issues to the forefront, to produce these forums when we can hash these problems out, because prior to this, there isn't enough discussion.
This is Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, the NPR News Quiz.
So you ready to play, Yura?
Sure.
All right, here's your first limerick.
Old Noah cried out, "Oh, dagnabbit, we really must learn to cohabit. If you glow in the dark, come on down to the Ark. I've got space for a mutant green
rabbit." Yes. Unbelievable as it may sound, it's true. Alba is an albino rabbit that under regular light just looks furry and cute. But turn on the black light.
So this gives us a sense of the kinds of conversations, debates, discourses that have been generated around this work, which was part of my intention originally. And basically, to conclude, I will point out that because of the censorship and the particular nature of the reception of this work, which has been going on for 10 years, I have developed a whole series of works under the rubric of Rabbit Remix. But the one that I would like to present to close my presentation tonight is this one called Lagoglyphs. And I am very thankful to Scott and Nina for their help in making this a reality. So in January of this year, I created this work initially, and I looked at this satellite from a company called Digital Globe, which is one of the companies that Google uses for Google Earth. And this satellite called Worldview II had gone up at that point. And I studied it and came to the conclusion that the satellite sees the world in grids of pixels that measure 50 centimeters. So I created a Lagoglyph, which is a series from the Rabbit Remix, that has this bunny image using pixels measuring 50 centimeters. So here I am standing on the roof of the building where I had my exhibition, and we have the work now visible. It was created specifically for this satellite. So let's see if we can zoom in and actually see it through Google Earth itself. It is my goal to basically create Lagoglyphs all over the planet and allow us, with just a few clicks, to zoom in and see them. Hold on. There. There it is. And into the eye of the storm. There you go. Thanks.
We have a few minutes for questions for Eduardo. Oh, there's one in the back.
Hey, so I think obviously the rabbit thing I guess I was a little more angry myself too when you were describing it there, and that's why I realized, or repeated in Blackbird. I guess I really do kind of have to question the empathy of working with an animal that can't choose. Can make that decision. My own kind of moral test is, would I do that to a family member or a loved one? And I would say, if a family member or loved one wanted to do that for themselves, so I support it. That's one thing. But if they didn't have an ability to choose, and to be kind of true to what you identified as real ethical issues surrounding this, I guess I question whether you were true to it with the rabbit, and that it couldn't really choose it. And would you advocate, even given the positive benefits of my attention to animal research or animal testing? I think that's kind of maybe a bad precedent. I would not want to draw the plight of the criminals in the United States into light by making a new criminal, saying this criminal being wrong by this experiment.
How would you respond?
Sure. This comment gives me the opportunity to clarify a very important point, is that you don't take an existing rabbit and modify it. That's impossible. So the work you do in the microscope with a single cell. Pretty much you combine transgenics with IVF. So basically you have the egg, and then you have the male reproductive cell inside the egg. And it is in the male reproductive cell, just one single cell, that you introduce the DNA. So there is no rabbit there that you introduce. I understand that if we're not familiar with the process, we might picture something cruel, that you take a bunny and you inject something to it, but it's not like that at all. You're working in the microscope with an individual cell, and then you are bringing into the world a healthy bunny. So it's a very different process. And the other aspect of this is that it is intrinsic to life that the life that comes into the world does so by a process that is developed by a previous generation or by another living being. In other words, no single life form in the world ever has the choice to come into the world. It's always a decision, say, of our parents, or if it's a non-human, it's a decision of a human. So it is always, in this case, there's no exception. The decision is always made by others. The question here is bringing into the world a life form that did not exist before. And then we're back to the beginning of your comment, which has to do with responsibility and ethics. That is why, for me, it was absolutely indispensable to bring the bunny home so that I could be personally responsible for it. And when the censorship came, I started a whole campaign to free the bunny, and I went back to Paris. I spent 9 days in Paris every day mobilizing public opinion, and I created a flag, and I gave public talks, and I tried to work with the lab. And once it became clear that that was not going to happen, rather than succumbing and accepting what they wanted, which was to make Alba disappear, then I continued to develop a whole series of works to keep her virtually alive, so that her memory would not be erased by those who tried to make her disappear.
Whatever happened to Alba?
She never left the lab. And rabbits usually live on average 8 years, so it's 10 now.
Do you still have that microchip in your ankle?
I do.
Has it ever come in handy?
No, but if you're wondering if it makes airports sound alarms, it does not. My belt has more metal than the microchip. But next time, if you remind me, next time I'll bring the scanner and you can scan me.
Blackbird's out of Google with this, yeah. Any more questions for Eduardo?
Thank you. One more?
Process of how you transcoded the passage of the Bible into Morse code, and then how that was sort of transcoded into DNA code. Where I sort of got lost was the bacteria that was created out of that or from that.
Sure. See, the way you do this is you take the DNA and you insert that DNA in what is called a plasmid. A plasmid is a ring of DNA at this point. You find it in nature, but at this point is engineered with areas specifically for you to insert the DNA that you are interested in working with. So you move your DNA into the plasmid goes into the bacterium basically in a solution. It's pretty mechanical, really. It's a solution that makes the bacteria open up. And in that liquid, the plasmid just naturally moves in. And how do you know that all bacteria have actually accepted your DNA? The plasmid has also a sequence that endows the bacterium to resistance to antibiotics. In other words, after you do that work, you put the bacteria in another medium with antibiotics. Those that you're doing pretty much straightforward Darwinian selection at that point. Those that have accepted your DNA survive, and those that didn't, just don't.
You killed the bacteria.
I do, yes, I do. And another way that you see this is there is another sequence in there which allows the bacteria to glow with the same gene that Alba glows. So you do this first phase to select, and then you have confirmation, because all you have to do is put the Petri dish on a UV light box, and boom, if they glow, you see that they accepted your plasmid. Yes.
Anyone like dog breeders or horse breeders, does anyone step forward to kind of defend you? You know, we breed for this color, these codes, and our dogs don't glow or things.
No, and the one point that the media never really talked about, because obviously they're more interested in selling papers than really disclosing how this works, is that Alba doesn't glow all the time. If she was walking here, she wouldn't be glowing, because you absolutely must have two things to see the glow. One is a blue light of a very specific frequency, because the GFP protein and the source have to go together. There are several kinds of lights, several kinds of proteins. They have to go together. So it has to be a very specific frequency of blue for that particular protein. That's one thing. And for you to see, you need to do so through a yellow filter, because you got to block the blue light. Otherwise, you're going to have, she's albino, so otherwise you're going to have blue and white, and that's what you're going to see. You got to block the blue, and then you can see the green emission. And of course, this is never mentioned. Okay, thanks.
Next up, we have Andrew Senior who is a British artist living and working in New York in sculpture and electronic art. He has exhibited internationally, including an honorable mention at Prix Vita 8.0, the Blind Art Foundation Prize, and Madrid Abierto, 2008. He has co-chaired the ACM Multimedia Conference Art Track, and Andrew Senor's art is informed by his technical research in human-computer interaction, multimedia, and computer vision, for which he holds several patents and has published extensively. He currently works on speech recognition in the research group at Google here in New York City.
Thank you very much, Scott. So today I'd like to talk about the piece that I have in this exhibition, which is Couch Potato Farm. And after I've spoken, Sandra will talk about the piece that I worked with her and Jason Weston on called Refugium. That was a collaborative effort. But I'll talk about Couch Potato Farm first. And like Scott himself and Eduardo, I got interested in artificial life projects a few years ago. And Couch Potato Farm was my first work investigating artificial life. Previously, I'd worked in steel sculpture and landscape art, and then started to transition into electronic works. These are some of the previous works. And then I started to think about artificial life, and we've just seen the most important work in artificial life. But artificial life covers a wide range of types of art, including biological experimentation, like we've just seen, robotic systems that behave like living creatures, or computer simulation of life. And that's what Couch Potato Farm is. It's an electronic simulation of an ecosystem. So I imagined, what would life be like if it could live in television signals instead of living in the real world? We have all these different sources of electromagnetic radiation that surround us all the time. Increasingly, we have Wi-Fi, television, radio, cellular telephones. We still don't really know the effects that they have on real life. But there's initial work now in capturing the energy from television transmissions to power electronic devices. So we do actually have now examples of life that is powered by television signals. But I wondered what would happen if we could actually have an ecosystem that lived within the television signals. So I created Couch Potato Farm that is a virtual ecosystem that watches television. So it's a software system into which I feed a television signal from a television tuner. So this is an example image from a television program. And it lives off the television signal, and you can see its effects by its it changes the television signal. So if we had a clean transmission, we'd see the image on the left. But after the ecosystem has extracted some of the energy from that television signal, then we get an image, a distorted image on the right. And you can see the work in the back corner of the lobby here, running on a series of programs just from live television. So I wanted to explain a little bit about how the system works. It takes in television signals from the TV tuner and then processes them through two kinds of artificial life system. One is a cellular automaton, which is similar to Conway's life. So this is a famous early example of a computer program that in some sense simulates life. It takes the state from one time, applies a series of rules, and then generates a new state. And the basic domain of my Couch Potato Farm is a cellular automaton like this that lives off the television signal. So it takes in red, green, and blue energies in each pixel. So it now has 3 layers instead of this single layer like Conway's life. And adjacent cells affect each other, but they're also affected by this external signal. So where we have a lot of blue, then we'll get very strong blue potatoes, I call them, in this field, because they watch television all the time. And that blue, if you have a strong blue potato in a particular pixel, then it will tend to drain out the color from the blue color from the television signal. So what you see in the affected television, it has the blue color drained out. And so we have a time delay as we see one color, then that gets drained out of subsequent images. Then I hypothesized another part of the ecosystem, which were animals, which were mobile creatures that could move around within the ecosystem. And they would interact, they would feed off the potatoes as they moved around and interact with each other. So there are 4 species in this ecosystem. Particular animals eat other animals of different species, or they mate with animals of the same species and opposite gender. And they also affect the television signal in different ways to produce an affected video. I guess you'll have to look at the work itself. This video isn't working on this display. And so the animals are encoded with a genetic algorithm. So every time they mate, then they produce offspring with potential mutations and a combination of the genes of the 2 parents. And the genes encode a variety of factors, including the speed of the animals, their longevity, the range at which they can detect other animals of the same or different species. And so as an ecosystem watches a particular program, then you'll get a particular convergence on a solution that works for that television program. And then as the program changes, then you'll get a different population arising that matches the characteristics of the new program. So when the animals mate, then the mother is static for a while and then produces a new child which has the genes spliced from the 2 parents with some possible mutation. So this is an earlier video that shows, this is showing the original signal in the bottom right and the potato field in the larger image with the strong colors that adapted based on the colors that have been seen in the previous images in the original signal. Then as we go along, we'll see the affected signal. Here's the affected signal with patches of color drained out from the original signal based on the presence of this potato field. And then finally here we have the field with the creatures moving around, eating the potatoes, so leaving trails of blackness. The large image here is just the animals themselves in isolation, visualized. And then here we have the affected TV, which is what you see on the monitor in the exhibition. So, and the animals have these auras around them which are affecting the TV. In this case, they're brightening the images. They're also delaying through time, so presenting television from the past, and also shifting the television image, the effects that surround the presence of the creatures. Then finally, I wanted to talk about one other work that I've done, which is another artificial life piece called Earthwords, which imagines what would words be if they were alive, and how do texts come about by imagining that individual words could be alive. And it imagines handwritten words as organisms moving around, and particular words have affinities to each other based on their presence in an original text. So this shows the initial text that I took, which is a piece by Derrida talking about signs and inscriptions on monuments. And I've taken that this is the origin, which defines the affinities between the words. And then we'll move into a different screen, which actually imagines the words as alive and interacting with each other. And as this comes up, I can take questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And then Sandra will talk about our joint work next.
Are there questions for Andrew? Yes.
To clarify, so the cycle of the couch potato is continuous? Does it reboot itself and start over? Or is
It does have, it can reset. If all the creatures die out, then I restart the ecosystem with a new set of initial conditions.
What we're seeing here is live.
So in this case, I switched the work to HD for this exhibition, and I haven't yet got the HD running live at 30 frames a second, so this is actually stored video. But the idea is that it can run live, but not in HD at the moment.
What ideally would be your content besides an exhibition? Potential for people having this?
As an artwork, as a display on the wall, and ideally it would be running live. I've been making progress in making it faster to run in real time on live signals. And in an earlier implementation, you could also have conditions in the ecosystem that would actually change the channels, so that the creatures could actually change the channel based on their genetic makeup and the conditions in the ecosystem.
Are there more questions?
I have one. Do you see it as feasible that life forms could evolve? Like, let's just say, for example, a virus is being able to mutate and grow and along with the computer networks?
Yes, potentially computer viruses. I mean, the couch potato farm is completely a figment of my imagination, but potentially with if people coded genetic algorithms into the viruses on the that could spread themselves, then yeah. But I think they would have to be encoded deliberately. So this is the earthwords showing the words crawling around, and as they find words to which they have an affinity, then they actually lock together and form a joint phrase. So here we see A and monument, which occurred together in the original text, so now they become a single creature, which will now crawl around the environment looking for other words that they were adjacent to in the original piece.
Does it ultimately resolve?
No, because they also can fall apart as well. Just randomly, they disconnect when they get very large. Okay, thank you.
Next up is Sandra Cordero, who also lives and works in New York. She studied animation and painting at New York University and Hunter College. Her work has been shown at the Queens Museum of Art and at films festivals across the country. She is a member of the Sperm Whale Collective, which creates interactive installations and visuals at events throughout the Northeast.
Oh, thank you. Volume good? In the back? Yes. Hi. So my name's Sandra. I'm going to talk about Refugium I and II, which is the piece in the room back there. It was a collaboration between myself, Andrew, who you just met, and Jason, who also works at Google. A refugium is a haven for populations of flora and fauna which were previously more widespread. And just to give you an idea of the timeline for this, we started working on this in July. We made this piece specifically for this exhibition. We wanted to combine traditional media with digital art. So the idea was that I would contribute paintings, which would then be used as JPEGs, and then Andrew and Jason would create visual effects to manipulate the images. We found out that the theme of the show was going to be the future, which got us thinking what nature is going to look like many, many years from now. And we wanted to find a way of conveying this by mixing painting and video. So we came up with the idea that I would create a painting of a forest scene. Andrew had this idea of trees in a forest scene from below and then putting effects on the image so that you get the sense of leaves moving in the breeze. And Jason was more interested in what ocean life would be like in the future. So he wanted to work with a marine painting where he would create effects that evoke the motion of waves in the sea. Prior work and inspiration, I know for me personally, I really like Jacques Olivier's work. He does really large animated paintings, which he then projects onto a wall. And the sperm whale is a collective that Jason and I are members of, which mixes traditional and digital art. For example, in this image, the drawings were made in pastel on paper, scanned in, and then animated digitally using Orca, which is an open source program written by members of the sperm whale. And as we were discussing how this was going to be displayed, like what kind of screens we would mount it on, how we were going to show it, we just started wondering, well, what would happen if we projected onto the paintings themselves instead of using flat screens? What would that look like? So we started making some rough drafts. Andrew wrote the first test and processing, which is an open source Java-based graphics language. This is a still photo that he used to manipulate in the rough draft, where the leaves are moving very subtly. The final version was written in C++ with OpenGL, and also used some code from Orca, which is another graphics-based language. And everything that you see in the next room is being rendered real time. This is the painting that Jason used for his rough draft that I did of a spiny lobsters. Spiny lobsters have been around for millions of years, longer than humans, and they'll probably be around for millions of years after we're gone, getting along just fine without us. And this is a draft of him projecting effects onto the painting. We were playing around with having the projection bleed beyond the edges of the canvas and kind of make an animated border. So meanwhile, I just happened to be having a trip booked to visit my mother, who lives in Wisconsin. And she just happens to live in a forest. And this is a photo of her backyard. So I spent a few days just taking photos, sketching a lot of the plant life out there. And then when I got back to New York, I made some compositional layouts just to get an idea. This is the first one. I was inspired by all these really weird, alien-looking fungus that were growing in the logs and tree trunks in the forest. The second idea, I was thinking of a swampy sort of future where we've created so much global warming that we have these mutant Venus flytraps that you see at the bottom of the screen, who are just eating up every protein source they can find in their environment. And the third one, which is the one we all agreed was the most successful, was also the most in keeping with Andrew's original idea of looking up through the leaves in a forest. It's a mix of domestic and wild vegetation. This is the painting that was created from it. You can see, for example, the chartreuse leaves at the bottom are inspired from my mom's rhododendrons, and next to them are leaves based on sketches of weeds I took that were growing in the driveway. And some of them I took more liberty with, like the purple thistle things. I wanted to see what they would look like in the future. I wanted to keep that sense of, a much warmer environment where you've got, a lot of humidity. You see the sun through yellow haze, and the pollen just hanging in this really thick air. So while I was doing that, Jason and Andrew writing the effects, which they were then used on JPEGs, which I took of the paintings. They wrote 10 different effects, which are cycling through randomly, and the effects change every 10 minutes. 4 of the effects chop up the image into blocks, and then these patches are moved around randomly or using a sine wave over time. So you can get that effect of leaves in the wind or an ocean wave moving over the image. 2 of the effects work on the contrast and color of the image and change it slowly over time. 3 of the effects take pixels of the same color and drop them down the canvas at a speed which is a function of their color. So certain colors move faster or slower, and it creates this effect of the image melting. And there's one color fill effect where it starts out black, and then the image fills in based on the color. Like different colors have different starting points. And then when the image is completely filled in, it starts fading to black again. So once this was ready, we installed it. I think it was Andrew who had the idea to use one projector for both images, just to kind of help with installing. And then they had to write a program to tweak the placement of the projected images so that they aligned with the paintings, because we decided we didn't want the projection bleeding onto the wall behind the canvas. And we had to figure out a way of compensating for the keystoning of the projected image. So, yeah, I think it was an interesting experience for viewers. People have said, how is it working? Like, they didn't quite get, some people thought that the image was emanating from the painting, and some people would look around and say, where's the projector, or where's the other projector? So I think it was successful in that sense in combining traditional and digital art together. So yeah, any questions? Nice. Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Our last speaker of the evening is Marina Zurkow, who is a video and media artist whose works have taken the form of multi-channel videos, customized multi-screen computer pieces, performative and interactive works. Her recent animated psychological narratives address humans and their relationships to animals, plants, and the weather. Since 2000, Zurkow has exhibited at the Sundance Film Festival, the Rotterdam Film Festival, the Seoul Media City Biennial, Ars Electronica, Creative Time, The Kitchen, the Walker Arts Center, the National Museum for Women in the Arts, and I-Beam, among other venues. She has been a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellow, a Rockefeller New Media Fellow, and a Creative Capital Grantee. Zurkow is on the faculty of NYU's Interactive Technology Program, ITP, and lives in Brooklyn. She is represented by Bryce Wolkowitz Gallery in New York.
This was an unexpected prop, this mic, so I'm going to juggle my text. I'm going to try to really stick to this text so I don't start blathering. So last year I completed a body of 11 works that sort of fall under this title, Crossing the Waters. The works were made between 2006 and 2009. And the pieces thematically addressed climate change. And in each of these works, I took a fairly different approach to the material, somewhere between moving paintings and psychological narrative. So a few things about this series. The works are all very long, slow loops, and they're unconventionally formatted for moving images, often displayed on custom-built multi-monitor units. Many of them are hung on the wall. They're sort of plug-and-play, custom computing parts, and so on. The sort of intention of the work is to create these pieces that you would end up living with. They're not linear pieces. They're kind of meant to be seen over, anywhere from, some pieces run 9 to 20 minutes, or had been running 9 to 20 minutes. And here's just another example of some smaller works from Bryce Wolkowitz Gallery. Often the pieces are designed modularly, so I've reformatted them. In this case, they've been scaled up for installation context in an institution. The same piece here you can see in Croatia at a gallery called Gray Area, and this is a gallery that only exists in this villa doorway and is meant to be seen from boats passing by. This is the original format for the piece that's out in the lobby, Slurb. And it was commissioned by the city of Tampa for an outdoor biennial festival called Lights on Tampa and exhibited there in 2009. So I thought, I'm not going to show the piece because obviously it's out there, and I hope that you'll have a chance to see it and listen to the soundtrack, which you can only hear through the headphones out there, but the soundtrack is pretty key to the piece. It's an 18-minute loop, and a seamless 18-minute loop. So I thought I'd use the piece, though, to sort of describe the process of constructing the work that I make and use Slurb as a model to sort of demonstrate that. First of all, almost all of the projects in this series are rotoscoped, and rotoscoping is an animation technique where you draw directly on top of video material frame by frame. In my case, the work is completely hand-done. And the second thing I want to say is that despite the fact that the works look like extremely unified pictures, they are actually kind of a collage and cobbled together from really disparate sources. Many of the works have a futuristic or fantastic tone to them, but all of the source material for the rotoscoping was found on the internet, a space that I'd call, in itself a kind of an interdependent ecosystem, and a space in which you find both competing and complementary meme pools. All the footage I use is real, in other words, and it might resonate as something you saw somewhere before from news sites, from Google searches, YouTube, and so on. The third thing is that nearly all of the elements in these works are composed as loops. Because I work alone most of the time and hand-drawn animation is labor-intensive, using looped character behaviors is very economical and efficient. But these loops also have a really distinct sort of stutter to them. They're very imperfect. And that adds or kind of breaks the seamless sort of rendered space that these pieces seem to sort of exude and create a kind of a brokenness. Finally, I look at these works as ambient moving paintings more than narrative cartoons. And they're reminiscent of Asian scroll paintings in both their formats and the way that the landscape is moved across the screen. What you're looking at here is almost half of the storyboard for Slurb. And the 18-minute length of the piece was determined by just a simple empirical process of seeing how long it would take to, in a generous fashion, move this storyboard across the picture plane. Tampa is the site that you see in Slurb that's half submerged. And the piece itself really looked at the Gulf of Mexico's changing ecology while speculating on the reality of this present-day return to a primordial sea and what that kind of a return to an older, more primitive form of sea, what might mean if you mix together all of these new sort of speculative societies. Tampa and the entire Gulf Coast, including New Orleans, is at risk for flooding. For the Gulf, it occurs during hurricane season. And the volume of these conditions is worsening from climate change. For Lights on Tampa, I wanted to make a piece that addressed this and to create a confluence of facts and speculations that were specific to the Gulf Coast, but also global in scope. The Gulf and the southern Atlantic coast used to have a healthy shrimp fishing industry, but pollutants, agricultural runoff, overfishing, and ocean warming have worldwide altered the ocean's chemical balance, rendering it acid and deprived of oxygen. The result isn't only a significant decrease in diversity, but also a phenomenon referred to as, quote, the rise of slime, end quote. Slime being toxic algae, jellyfish, and other more primitive forms of sea life. And these are forms that survive really well in the aforementioned conditions of sort of an epoxic ocean. So these trawling boats used to be fitted for shrimp catches, and they've now been reconfigured to catch jellyfish for the Asian market, where they're considered a delicacy. To explore this story of a transformed ecology, I wanted to transpose class and cultural concerns and ask questions about who and how might thrive in these new conditions. I started to research my cast of characters, looking for ways to soften this, relatively unpleasant scenario. I wanted to make something that had the feeling of J.J. Granville's 19th century satirical illustrations, creating hybrid creatures and car-wrecked mermaids and a macabre Stephen King chorus that had some traces of ethnographic portraiture and that also mined a rich history of traditionally aquatic and contemporary water-based lifestyles. So I became kind of interested in portraying contemporary people accustomed to living on the water, like the members of the Intha tribe that you see in these images. They live in Myanmar, and they live in not only Myanmar, there's other sort of similar aquatic communities in Cambodia and in Vietnam, but many of them now, the lakes that they've lived on for hundreds of years in this way, and they live in houseboats, and they farm hydroponically. It's become quite unsustainable because their waterways have also become polluted by some of the same things that I described are happening in the oceans. So this is, for instance, a hydroponic, raft-based hydroponic farm system from this community. I was also really interested in the kind of optimistic design of these amphibious houses. These are being implemented in the Netherlands. And also I was really interested in this kind of tailgate party from hell scenario. So you can kind of get a sense of all of that in the piece, I think. And I think this is a picture from Morpeth, England, from the floods from 2 years ago. This was from a very, very small river, very heavy rains, and utterly shocked the community. They'd never really experienced anything like this. So this is, a fairly, it's a reality. It's not that far to sort of speculate. Finally, with Slurb, I wanted to make a travel narrative, one that unfolded like a Chinese scroll and circled around continuously like a carousel. One that would take you from the city of Tampa and follow its landmarks out past the broken highways and into the suburbs and then back around again. This is actually one of the first, this is an 12th century scroll from Japan, animal scroll. It is also very long. This is the site of the projection for Slurb. Across the plaza from Tampa's ice hockey stadium was the parking lot. Well, here, this is the parking lot that's across from this building on the right. And fortunately, during the week that the piece was projected, the circus was in town. And so every evening at dusk when the projector would fire up, just coincidentally, the elephants would have to walk across the plaza and into the ice hockey stadium. So it really had this kind of like pop off the screen effect, because if you hear the music, there's a kind of a circus theme, or a really distorted circus theme that sort of underlines it. So when I made Slurb, there wasn't the same kind of public upset around the health of the Gulf of Mexico as there is post the British petroleum disaster. And now Slurb is encoded with a very different resonance, as I experienced in May in Austin when I showed the work. And the really disturbing thing was in Texas, where people were, the oil was imminent. And there was a real sense with the piece, and I was there for a week in residence, and so I spoke to a lot of different kinds of people. And disturbingly, the response was how comforting this piece was to them, because they felt like, look at your eyes, they felt like this piece demonstrated our adaptability, and that in the end we would all be okay. Yeah, I thought, wow, 10 gone, 10 left. Okay. I'm going to jump ahead, actually, and show a little bit of a new work. So you can take my time with this because it's 144 hours long. So this piece is called Mesocosm, Northumberland, United Kingdom. And it's an animated landscape representing 1 year of real time on the moors of northern England. It's the first in a series of works that use data inputs or algorithms to determine the activities you see on screen. This piece runs as a 144-hour cycle, 146-hour cycle, I'm sorry, my math is really terrible. Animated objects are placed on a stage and code determines the frequency and order of their appearance. No cycle is identical to the last, as the characters and seasonal weather are determined by a simple probability equation. 1 hour of world time elapses in each minute of screen time. Because of a long duration of events unfolding, mesocosm is ideally meant to be seen by passersby in public space. Or if you left your web browser open constantly, I suppose that would also be a good way to see the work. Where one might become invested in the fate of the protagonist on a summer's eve and be surprised 72 hours later when it's snowing and the animated field is full of refugees. The title mesocosm is drawn from the field of environmental science and refers to experimental simulated ecosystems that allow for manipulation of the physical environment for, quote, organismal, community, and ecological research, end quote. Mesocosm Northumberland is the first in this series, which will include an array of landscapes that use different data strategies to determine their unfolding. The landscapes include Tsukiji, the largest fish market in the world in Tokyo, a depleted oil field in Texas, a horse race track, and a farm that grows animals for pharmacological purposes. These landscapes reflect common global concerns while being geographically distinct and culturally specific. Each site evinces a particular and heavy dependency on resources, is an extreme example of managed nature, which is definitely the case. Oh, this is awesome that he gets up. He doesn't get up very often, and so sometimes I've shown this piece and he's just sitting there the entire time. People just are like, I don't really understand what's going on. This piece doesn't, nothing really ever happens. Sorry to interrupt myself, but it's very exciting. So the landscapes reflect common global concerns while being geographically distinct, culturally specific, and each site is evidence of a particular and heavy dependency on resources, an extreme example of managed nature, or possesses a rich cultural or mythological history, and embodies a tension between the magically real and the pathologically monetized. So I think that's really all I want to say today, but I thought maybe I could just leave this running, and if you had any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes.
So there's this question about closed and open loop works. I was running a lobby here, I guess, closed loop, and it actually took me a while to start that watching you do that. And in fact, you just surprised about your guy getting up here. Makes this, I guess, open loop.
I've never really heard those pitched against each other, but
it's like in 50s shows and I guess I'd be interested in hearing, because Scott's work is definitely about like more open systems where it continues to evolve over time. How do you, as an artist, especially with like a chosen music frame like this, where you're actually talking about something, that's more through exploration in that act. How do you, what boundaries do you push, like in making this new every time? And how do you know that it'll turn into a successful piece if you think about that?
Well, it's really, I worked on this for the last year. I'm pretty much done. I have some code tweaks and some other things that I need to finish in the piece. But the piece is a black hole. It'll just absorb anything I put into it. There are a couple hundred animated characters and weather instances in the piece. There's snow and wind and different animals in different seasons. And there's machinery, farm machinery, and refugees, and there's a lot of stuff in this piece. And I, at the same time, felt that the piece was incredibly boring. And in a way, it is. And I've made a kind of commitment to producing a truly ambient work that you don't know where it's in the front and where it's in the where things are the subject or the object of the work. And it's something I've become really interested in. There's a book I'm very keen on called Ecology Without Nature by Timothy Morton, who's a literary critic and eco-critic, and who talks a lot about sound art and about producing this literally ambivalent world in which there's things that are in the foreground and the background and sort of shift space. And so I'm very interested in that as a kind of response to the noisy, fast, crazy, very clearly defined space in which we mostly occupy the subjective position. So I have to sort of stand behind this experiment and hope for the best. This long answer to that question in terms of how do I push the boundaries. I feel like I am pushing the boundaries of my own tolerance, and hopefully this has resonance for other people, especially when I think you see more than one of these. This is the first one, and it's such a weird choice. I had a residence last summer in Northern England, and so I went there really to do this kind of Nature 2.0, really very reconfigured view of what nature and our relationship to the natural world is, and had gone as a researcher, and this was sort of one of the outcomes. The other outcome is I'm doing a performance piece there where we're producing food made out of invasive species, which is, and producing them as kind of ethnic foodstuffs for many reasons, because there's a very intense connection between the rhetoric around invasive species and rhetoric around race. So, these have become kind of in tandem in a way with other manifestations that are more direct. These are very much about mediation and narratives, stories that we tell ourselves about the natural world. And so I'm sort of not sure what I'm doing, but I know for certain I'm finished with that work. So this is like a kind of new exploration.
Just following up on his question about how do you know if it's successful or not, and you described how there are so many elements potentially involved with the piece that it could be pure chaos, but it seems like you've designed the piece not to be pure chaos.
Mm-hmm.
There is a simplicity to it despite the potential for all the chaos.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I come from film and this extremely linear authored, old-fashioned sort of mentality about making. And, a question is how much can I give that up and how much can I let accident really happen in this space? And one thing I'm not really, I'm interested in bringing in more procedurally produced elements into this work. I think some of the weather components start to look like that anyway, and there's no reason why they're not being produced algorithmically. But I'm not willing to sort of relinquish my hand in the 2D space, which demands order, layering, a sense like it's artifice of perspective and a sense of pictorial cohesion. So that, in a way, is what has saved it, but that also is what I think is, in the end, a kind of a limitation on this system that I'm proposing. And again, I don't know where this is going to go in a couple of years. I have no idea. Yes?
What's driving the piece? Are these autonomous agents, these elements?
Oh gosh, nothing that fancy. They're independent Swifts. And there are monthly buckets. So there's a bucket for January, February, March, and then each of those is divided into a dawn, day, dusk, and night. And in each of those, time frames, there's a probability number, a percentage that says this will come out. Super simple.
Like the birds just flew out, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they flew out, feasibly they could have flown out and he wouldn't be sitting there. And then they wouldn't have landed on him, right?
Yeah, but the piece is very, he is always sitting there when the birds come in. They eat him in the summer. They sort of peck at his flesh, and the squirrels, here's some squirrels. So the squirrels kind of eat him also. They only come out when he's sitting there, so he only leaves at night. So that's the workaround.
But every time, let's say, those birds come out, are they going to land on him and do the same thing?
Well, there's a bunch of them, but yes, currently there's not anything more sophisticated
so they're not running there in their own...
No, they're placed on an XY on the stage. So it's a super compromise. I feel guilty having to confess that, but...
Yeah, but we could.
Good.
So it seems like you've sort of come to terms with the fact that people don't enjoy watching narrative works in a gallery setting. I mean, nobody really goes. I mean, I've never really seen a successful work in that people go into the gallery and they watch, the entire work through. I mean, because it's not meant for that. You walk in and it's at a random point.
Right.
So, I mean, your works are sort of designed around that idea that people can come in at any point. So, what other successful ways that you know how to deal with that? I mean, I know some spaces, they have these special people come in, and it's sort of more like a movie theater.
Right, like Yves Sussman has an 83-minute piece up now, The Rape of the Sabines at Haunts of Venison, with a screening schedule. Yeah.
So, I mean, what ways do we as artists have to deal with that? I mean, as narrative artists.
Well, I mean, it's funny because this wouldn't even work in a gallery. This needs to be in a different kind of public space with regular, like commuter space. It's perfect for it. Because if you saw this, it's even hard to show this here. I have to sort of explain the sort of machination or show you little bits and pieces or can some experiences for you. But you don't get a sense of really, I mean, it's great, the dump truck came out, but who knows what's really going to happen. And so these are spaces that are meant to be seen with very long periods of passing by or waiting or, loitering. So this isn't a good gallery solution.
But it is with somebody then would have to buy it and take it home to.
Well, yeah, it's great if you want it in your living room, sure. Oh, yes, I see what you're saying. Yeah, but this is like a very complicated, longer conversation about what galleries or how they're willing to represent work and how is this interesting or not to sell on the part of a dealer. So we're a particularly biased community sitting in this room, interested in these issues. Yeah.
Do you draw all the characters?
I do. I had help from some really wonderful animators on this, but I draw and sort of determine all the keyframes, and then people have done some of the rotoscoping with me. Yeah. Sorry, I can't answer that in a more coherent way.
Are there more questions? I have a question. So you had several pieces that actually had a whole lot of screens. So this looks like one screen.
Yeah.
But you had some that had like 20 screens or something like that.
I've done as much as for 21 screens, yeah.
So how do you keep them synchronized? How do you write that piece for?
Well, the piece for 21 screens is in the San Jose Convention Center, and it's on a Cisco system. It's on Cisco's sort of scheduling system. So the piece is a site-specific piece where you're kind of looking at the space that you're standing in, but the space is flooded. So it's a very sort of, and it's on a closed circuit system. So most of the people who went to see the piece kept asking me if it was live, just because the closed circuit is such a dominant kind of paradigm for people to think that this is real or true or live. But that was quite simple. With the four screen piece, the Poster Children, the Polar Bear piece, which I didn't show tonight, but all the stuff's on my website. It's two computers that are checking each other through it. They're just checking to see that they remain in sync. So it gets more complicated the more screens you have. Now there are systems like Ackman makes an M-player system that has a board that'll synchronize at least six monitors to stay in sync with each other. So I like Ackman. It's Ma and Pa M-players. They're a really great company. My plug. Thank you.